When renowned physicist Lysander Thorne mockingly touched the ancient cross at the Cathedral of Sacred Aureole, no one expected the impossible to happen. The security cameras captured something that would shake the foundations of science itself, leaving even the most hardened skeptics questioning everything they believed. What follows is the bone-chilling true story that has left thousands speechless and changed one man's perspective on reality forever. Before we dive into this extraordinary tale that will challenge everything you think you know about science and faith, make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. You won't want to miss our upcoming stories that explore the thin line between the explainable and the supernatural. Now let's begin. The Cathedral of the Sacred Aureole stood like a gothic sentinel against the shimmering curtain of the aurora borealis, its spires piercing the night sky with an otherworldly grace. The unprecedented celestial display had drawn crowds to Misthaven Hollow, Vermont, but none were more skeptical of its supposed mystical significance than Dr. Lysander Roark Thorne. The theoretical physicist adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, his breath forming crystals in the winter air, as he stood before the cathedral's towering doors. The ancient stone edifice, with its weathered gargoyles and intricate stained glass, seemed to mock everything he believed in, everything he had spent his career proving through quantum mechanics and mathematical certainty. Fascinating architecture, isn't it? A voice like warm honey cut through the cold. Lysander turned to find a man in clerical garb, his silver hair catching the ethereal light of the aurora. "I'm Reverend Cassian Drake Ambrose. We don't often see academics at our evening services." Lysander's lip curled slightly. "The aurora borealis has brought all sorts of people out tonight, Reverend, though I suspect we see its beauty quite differently." His tone carried the weight of countless debates, of papers published disproving supposed miracles, of a lifetime spent unraveling mysteries through the lens of science. The Reverend's eyes, an unusual shade of amber, studied Lysander with an intensity that made the physicist slightly uncomfortable. Perhaps we're all seeking the same truth through different paths, Doctor. Thorne, your work on quantum entanglement is quite renowned in certain circles. Lysander stiffened. He hadn't introduced himself. Inside the cathedral was a masterpiece of shadow and light. Hundreds of candles flickered in the vast space, their flames dancing off the polished marble floors and casting ever-shifting patterns on the vaulted ceiling. The air was thick with incense and history and something else, something Lysander couldn't quite quantify. As they walked down the central aisle, Lysander noticed a woman studying one of the wall frescoes with scientific precision. Her tools suggested restoration work, but her methods seemed more suited to forensic analysis. She looked up as they passed, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of the Reverend's companion. "Ah, Meridian," Reverend Cassian called out. "Still trying to unlock our cathedral's secrets?" Meridian Fay Astor quickly tucked away what looked suspiciously like sampling equipment. "The artistry here is unique, Reverend. The pigments don't match any known medieval formulas I've studied." Lysander's scientific curiosity piqued despite himself. He started to ask a question, but was interrupted by a sound that seemed to emanate from the very stones themselves, the deep, resonant toll of the cathedral bells announcing the evening service. The congregation began filtering in, a mix of locals and visitors drawn by the aurora's display. Among them, Lysander noticed a striking woman with a professional camera, her movements suggesting she was documenting more than just architecture. Syra Blackthorne, he would later learn, had been investigating a series of inexplicable events at historic churches across New England. As the service began, Lysander found himself seated in the back pew, his analytical mind cataloging every detail. The way the aurora's light filtered through the stained glass created impossible colors. The acoustic properties of the space seemed to defy standard physics, with Reverend Cassian's voice carrying perfectly to every corner without any modern amplification. But it was the cross that drew his attention. Ancient, crafted from a metal he couldn't immediately identify, it hung above the altar with a presence that seemed almost alive. The longer Lysander stared at it, the more certain he became that something was wrong with its dimensions. They seemed to shift subtly when viewed from different angles, suggesting optical illusions that shouldn't be possible with physical matter. Beautiful, isn't it? A whisper came from beside him, making him start. The church groundskeeper Etherwolf had appeared without a sound. His eyes, like the Reverend's, seemed to hold knowledge far beyond their years. Though I suspect you see it more as a fascinating puzzle than a holy relic. Lysander straightened, his scientific pride pricked. There's no puzzle here, just primitive metallurgy and the human propensity for pattern recognition in random phenomena. I could prove it with a simple spectral analysis. Ether's smile held secrets. The cross welcomes all tests, Doctor. Thorne, though few who've studied it have walked away with their certainties intact. The challenge in those words was unmistakable. Lysander had built his career on debunking religious miracles through science. This would be no different. As the service continued, he found himself formulating equations, planning experiments, his mind already racing through possible explanations for the cross's unusual properties. He didn't notice how the aurora's light seemed to pulse in sync with his thoughts, or how Reverend Cassian and Meridian exchanged knowing glances. He missed the way Syra Blackthorne's camera focused on him rather than the ceremony, and how Etherwolf melted away into the shadows with a look of anticipation. What Lysander Roark Thorne did notice, with growing irritation, was the impossible math presenting itself in the cross's dimensions. And as the service drew to a close, he made a decision that would shatter his understanding of reality. He would prove, once and for all, that this was nothing more than an elaborate medieval trick. He had no way of knowing that the cathedral had been waiting centuries for precisely this moment, or that his touch would awaken something that science alone could never explain. The moment Lysander's fingers brushed against the ancient cross, the aurora borealis outside flared with impossible intensity, bathing the cathedral in waves of ethereal color. The physicist recoiled instantly, not from any religious reverence, but from an unexpected sensation that defied his understanding. The metal was warm, almost pulsing like touching a living thing. Fascinating reaction, isn't it? Reverend Cassian's voice carried a note of knowing amusement. The cathedral had emptied after the service, leaving only a handful of witnesses to what was unfolding. The cross seems particularly responsive tonight. Lysander pulled a small spectrometer from his coat pocket, his scientific mind already searching for rational explanations. Thermal anomaly, probably due to the unusual atmospheric conditions caused by the aurora. But even as he spoke, he noticed his normally steady hands trembling slightly. Meridian Faye Astor had abandoned any pretense of restoration work and was now openly documenting everything with sophisticated equipment of her own. "Dr. Thorne," she called out, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "Are you seeing these readings? The electromagnetic output is off the charts." Before Lysander could respond, every electronic device in the cathedral, phones, cameras, sensors, simultaneously erupted in a cacophony of alerts and alarms. Syra Blackthorne's professional camera began rapid firing on its own, capturing a series of images that would later reveal something extraordinary: traces of luminescent patterns in the air, forming complex geometric shapes that resembled advanced mathematical equations. "Impossible," Lysander muttered, adjusting his glasses as he stared at his spectrometer's display. "These energy signatures. They're similar to quantum entanglement patterns, but on a macro scale. That can't happen at room temperature." A deep chuckle echoed through the cathedral. Etherwolf emerged from the shadows near the altar, his weathered face illuminated by the still pulsing aurora light. "Science is a language, Doctor." Thorne. One of many used to describe the indescribable, but sometimes the vocabulary falls short. The groundskeeper's words were interrupted by a sound that seemed to vibrate through reality itself, a low, resonant hum that made Lysander's teeth ache and his vision blur. The cross above the altar began to emit a soft, pulsating glow that matched the frequency of the aurora perfectly. Dr. Zephyr Voss, who had been silently observing from the choir loft, finally spoke up. "Lysander, remember our work on consciousness-influenced quantum states. This is orders of magnitude beyond that, but the baseline signature is similar." Lysander's mind raced. He had collaborated with Zephyr years ago, before dismissing her theories about consciousness affecting quantum phenomena as pseudo-scientific nonsense. Now, watching the impossible data scroll across his instruments, those old experiments suddenly seemed relevant. "The cross," Meridian interjected, her scientific detachment cracking slightly. "It's not just reacting to the aurora, it's establishing some kind of coherent field. Look at the propagation pattern." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She was right. The luminescent equations hanging in the air were spreading, forming a complex three-dimensional matrix that seemed to be encoding itself into the very fabric of space around them. Lysander's scientific training warred with his senses as he watched mathematical constants he had worked with his entire career take physical form in the air. Reverend Cassian moved to stand beside the increasingly unsettled physicist. "You know, Dr. Thorne, the cathedral's archives speak of a night much like this one centuries ago. A night when the aurora danced, and a man of science touched this cross, seeking proof of his disbelief." "What happened?" Lysander asked, his throat dry, even as he told himself he didn't believe in such stories. The Reverend's amber eyes seemed to glow in the ethereal light. "He found his proof, though perhaps not the kind he was expecting. The real question is, are you prepared to face proof that challenges everything you believe?" As if in response to the Reverend's words, the cross's glow intensified. The equations floating in the air began to rotate and combine in ways that made Lysander's head spin. They were describing something that should be mathematically impossible, yet was happening right before his eyes. Syra Blackthorne's camera continued its autonomous documentation, its memory cards filling with images that would baffle photo analysis experts for months to come. "Dr. Thorne," she called out, her journalistic objectivity straining, "you might want to see this." She held out her camera's display, showing a series of rapid-fire shots. In them, the luminescent equations weren't just random formations. They were organizing themselves into a pattern Lysander recognized immediately. It was the same pattern he had discovered in his most recent and controversial paper on the mathematical structure of consciousness. "That's not possible," he whispered. "Those equations were published last month. This cross is centuries old." "Time," Etherwolf said softly, "is not always the straight line we imagine it to be. Sometimes it's more like—" He gestured to the swirling aurora visible through the stained glass. "That." The hum growing from the cross reached a fever pitch, and suddenly, every candle in the cathedral extinguished simultaneously. In the darkness, the glowing equations cast their own light, creating shadows that seemed to move with purpose. And in that moment, Lysander Roark Thorne, renowned skeptic, dedicated materialist, champion of rational thought, felt something he had never experienced before. The distinct sensation that reality itself was about to prove him gloriously, terrifyingly wrong. The darkness in the Cathedral of the Sacred Aureole was unlike anything Lysander had ever experienced. It felt alive, purposeful, as if the void itself was observing them through the floating mathematical equations that cast their own spectral light. The aurora outside had transformed into a writhing curtain of impossible colors, some of which seemed to exist beyond the visible spectrum. "Nobody move," Dr. Zephyr Voss called from the choir loft, her voice tight with professional excitement. "The quantum field coherence is reaching critical levels. One disruption could collapse the entire phenomenon." Lysander's scientific mind raced to process what his eyes were witnessing. The glowing equations hanging in the air had begun to merge and separate in a complex dance, forming patterns that seemed to follow the same mathematical principles he'd discovered in his research on consciousness. But there was something more, something his equations hadn't predicted. "The cross," Meridian gasped, her sophisticated monitoring equipment beeping frantically. "It's not just generating these effects, it's orchestrating them. Look at the wave function collapse patterns." Through the darkness, Lysander could see Reverend Cassian standing perfectly still, his amber eyes reflecting the ethereal light of the equations. The older man's calm seemed almost supernatural in itself, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment for years. "Tell me, Dr. Thorne," The Reverend's voice carried an ancient weight. In all your studies of quantum mechanics, did you ever consider that consciousness might be more than just an emergent property of neural activity? That perhaps what we call the soul is simply the part of consciousness that exists beyond the constraints of space-time? Before Lysander could formulate a suitably skeptical response, a new sound filled the cathedral, a harmonic resonance that seemed to vibrate at the exact frequency of human thought. The floating equations began to pulse in sync with the sound, and suddenly Lysander understood what he was seeing. "These aren't just mathematical formulas," he whispered, his voice trembling with the weight of realization. "They're a language, a way of encoding consciousness itself into the fabric of reality." Syra Blackthorne's camera continued its autonomous documentation, capturing images that defied conventional physics. "Dr. Thorne," she called out, her journalistic detachment cracking. "The patterns, they're forming some kind of message." Indeed, the glowing equations were now arranging themselves into a complex helical structure that rotated slowly in the center of the cathedral. Within its spiral form, Lysander could see fragments of every major mathematical breakthrough in human history, from ancient Babylonian calculations to his own recent discoveries about the quantum nature of consciousness. Aetherwolf's voice emerged from the shadows, carrying an edge of ancient knowledge. "The cross has been waiting, Dr. Thorne. Waiting for someone who could understand its message not through faith alone, but through the very mathematics you've dedicated your life to mastering." A sudden surge in the aurora's intensity sent waves of energy pulsing through the cathedral. The equations responded, their light intensifying until they were almost painful to look at. Lysander felt a pressure building in his mind, as if something vast and incomprehensible was trying to communicate directly with his consciousness. "The energy readings are off the scale," Meridian shouted over the growing harmonic resonance. "Whatever's happening, it's affecting the quantum structure of local spacetime." Dr. Zephyr Voss made her way down from the choir loft, her own instruments displaying readings that should have been impossible. "Lysander, remember our discussions about non-local consciousness? This is exactly what we theorized, but on a scale I never imagined possible." The pressure in Lysander's mind increased, and with it came understanding that transcended his scientific training. The equations weren't just showing mathematical truths. They were revealing the underlying mathematics of creation itself, the code that wrote reality into existence. Remarkable, isn't it? Reverend Cassian's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. How the language of science and the language of faith might be describing the same fundamental truth from different perspectives. The floating equations suddenly began to converge on the ancient cross, forming layers of mathematical complexity that made Lysander's head spin. Within their dance, he could see reflections of every scientific principle he had ever studied, but transformed, elevated into something that bridged the gap between quantum mechanics and consciousness itself. The cross isn't just a religious symbol, he realized aloud, his voice barely audible over the harmonic resonance. It's a key to understanding how consciousness interfaces with physical reality. Syra's camera captured the moment the equations aligned perfectly with the cross, creating a brief instant where the mathematics of the universe became visible to human eyes. In those frames, later studied by scientists and theologians alike, one could see the precise point where quantum mechanics met metaphysics. The pressure in Lysander's mind reached a crescendo, and with it came a clarity that shook him to his core. Every equation he had ever written about consciousness, every theory he had proposed about the quantum nature of thought, they were all just glimpses of a larger truth that the cross had been patiently waiting to reveal. "Dr. Thorne," Aetherwolf's voice cut through the rising chaos, "what you're seeing is only the beginning. The real question is, are you ready to accept what comes next?" The words had barely left Aether's lips when a surge of energy pulsed through the cathedral, so intense it made Lysander's teeth vibrate. The glowing equations that had been swirling around the cross suddenly contracted, condensing into a tight sphere of pure mathematical light that hung suspended in the air like a miniature sun. "The field collapse is accelerating," Dr. Zephyr Voss shouted, her instruments sparking with excess energy. The quantum coherence is reaching levels that shouldn't be possible in normal spacetime. Meridian's sophisticated monitoring equipment began emitting a high-pitched whine, its displays showing readings that defied conventional physics. "These patterns," she called out, her voice filled with both fear and wonder. "They're identical to brainwave patterns during near-death experiences, but amplified exponentially." Lysander stood transfixed, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. The sphere of concentrated equations had begun to pulse in perfect synchronization with his heartbeat, and with each pulse, new mathematical truths revealed themselves in his consciousness. It was as if the fundamental language of the universe was downloading directly into his brain. "Remarkable," Reverend Cassian observed, his calm voice a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around them. "The cross isn't just showing you equations, Dr. Thorne. It's showing you the mathematical structure of the soul itself." Syra Blackthorne's camera continued its autonomous documentation, though the images it captured now showed something even more extraordinary. The sphere of equations was casting shadows that didn't match the laws of optics. Instead of falling on surfaces, they seemed to fall through them, revealing deeper layers of reality beneath. "The quantum entanglement is spreading," Zephyr announced, checking her readings. "It's not just affecting local space anymore, it's creating a network of connection points throughout the cathedral, almost like neural pathways." Lysander felt a sudden shift in his perception, as if his consciousness was expanding beyond the confines of his physical body. The mathematical principles that had governed his understanding of the universe began to transform, revealing themselves as mere approximations of a far deeper truth. "The cross," he gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not generating these effects. It's translating them, converting something beyond our normal perception into mathematics we can comprehend." Aetherwolf emerged from the shadows once more, his presence somehow more substantial than before. "For centuries, this cathedral has stood as a bridge between the physical and the metaphysical. The cross is merely the keystone in that bridge, Dr. Thorne. And you, with your unique understanding of consciousness and quantum mechanics, are the first person in generations capable of crossing it fully." The sphere of equations began to expand again, but this time in a controlled manner. As it grew, it revealed layers of mathematical complexity that made Lysander's most advanced theories look like simple arithmetic. Within its structure, he could see the mathematical foundations of consciousness itself, elegantly interwoven with the quantum fabric of reality. "The readings are stabilizing," Meridian reported, though her voice shook slightly. "But they're forming a pattern I've never seen before. It's as if reality itself is being rewritten at the quantum level." Syra's camera captured the moment when the first physical manifestation appeared, a series of geometric forms that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could process. They emerged from the equation sphere like crystalline thoughts given form, each one encoding vast amounts of information about the nature of consciousness and its role in shaping reality. "Your equations were correct, Lysander," Zephyr called down from her position near the choir loft. "Consciousness isn't just an observer of quantum phenomena, it's an active participant in the creation of reality itself. The cross is showing us the mechanism by which that participation occurs." The pressure in Lysander's mind had become almost unbearable, but with it came understanding that transcended his scientific training. He could see how consciousness interfaced with quantum fields, how thought itself could influence the probability waves that determined physical reality. Every scientific principle he had ever studied was being transformed, elevated into something that united the objective and subjective aspects of existence. "The ancient texts speak of this moment," Reverend Cassian said softly, his amber eyes reflecting the light of the equation sphere. "When science and faith would find common ground not in compromise, but in the recognition of a deeper truth that encompasses both." Suddenly, the cross began to emit a high-frequency tone that seemed to resonate with something deep within Lysander's consciousness. The sphere of equations responded, its patterns shifting to reveal something that made his scientific mind real, a mathematical proof of the existence of the soul. "It's beautiful," Meridian whispered, tears streaming down her face as she watched the equations dance. The mathematics, it's perfect. Completely self-consistent and elegant in a way I've never seen before. But as Lysander reached out toward the sphere, drawn by an irresistible need to understand more, something unexpected happened. The equations began to arrange themselves into a message, one that spoke directly to his skeptical heart. Understanding is not enough. Truth requires more than observation. Are you ready to believe? The question hung in the air like a challenge, its glowing mathematical symbols pulsing with an intensity that seemed to demand an answer. Lysander Thorne, a man who had built his entire career on the foundation of empirical evidence and rational thought, found himself at the crossroads of understanding and belief. The energy patterns are shifting, Meridian announced urgently, her equipment emitting a series of escalating alerts. Whatever's happening, it's reaching a critical threshold. Dr. Thorne, if you're going to do something, it needs to be now. The sphere of equations had begun to rotate faster, its mathematical truths spiraling inward toward some impossible center. With each rotation, new layers of reality became visible, quantum fields interacting with consciousness, probability waves collapsing into definite states through the act of observation, and something more, something that his scientific training insisted couldn't exist. You see it now, don't you? Reverend Cassian's voice carried a note of genuine compassion. The mathematics you've discovered, the equations that define consciousness, they're not just describing the universe, Dr. Thorne. They're describing the interface between physical reality and something far more fundamental. Dr. Zephyr Voss's instruments began registering readings that made her pale. Lysander, the quantum coherence field is expanding exponentially. It's creating some kind of resonance cascade with human consciousness itself. Indeed, Lysander could feel it, a growing sensation that his consciousness was somehow entangling with the mathematical patterns swirling before him. Every equation he had ever written about the quantum nature of thought was being reflected back at him, but transformed, completed in ways that filled the gaps he had never been able to resolve. "The cross," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the harmonic resonance filling the cathedral. "It's not just showing us these patterns, it's offering a choice." Etherwolf stepped forward, his presence seeming to bend the light from the equation sphere in impossible ways. "Indeed, Dr. Thorne. As it has done before, across centuries, waiting for someone who could understand both the science and the significance. The question is not whether you can comprehend what you're seeing. You've already proven that. The question is whether you can take the final step beyond comprehension." Syra's camera captured the moment when the sphere's rotation reached its peak. The images would later show something extraordinary. The mathematical patterns had begun to form a bridge between the physical world and something else, something that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional spacetime. "The readings suggest a quantum tunneling effect," Meridian called out, her scientific detachment cracking under the weight of what she was witnessing. "But it's not just affecting particles, it's creating a pathway through the fundamental structure of reality itself." Lysander felt a pull toward the cross, not physical but something deeper, as if his very consciousness was being drawn toward a truth he had spent his entire career denying. The equations surrounding him were no longer just mathematical constructs. They had become a language expressing something his rational mind had never been able to accept. "Your equations about consciousness were correct," Reverend Cassian said softly, "but incomplete. You discovered the mathematics of how consciousness interfaces with reality, but you never asked why such an interface would exist in the first place. Why would the universe evolve in a way that allows consciousness to affect quantum states? Unless consciousness itself is not an evolution, but a fundamental property of existence." The pressure in Lysander's mind intensified as the mathematical patterns began to align with something he had glimpsed in his most groundbreaking work, a suggestion that consciousness might not be an emergent property of complex systems, but rather a basic feature of reality itself, as fundamental as space and time. "The field coherence is reaching maximum amplitude," Zephyr announced, her voice tight with both fear and excitement. "Whatever's going to happen, it's happening now." The sphere of equations suddenly contracted, condensing into a single point of brilliant light that hung between Lysander and the cross. Within that point, he could see every scientific principle he had ever studied, every mathematical truth he had discovered, all converging toward a singular revelation. "The choice before you," Ether's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, "is not between science and faith, Dr. Thorne. It's between accepting and rejecting a truth that encompasses both. Are you willing to step beyond the boundaries of what you think you know?" Lysander stood frozen, his lifetime of scientific skepticism warring with the undeniable evidence before him. The equations weren't just proving the existence of something beyond the physical. They were proving that the distinction between physical and metaphysical was itself an illusion, a product of limited human perception. "The patterns," Meridian gasped. "They're not just mathematical anymore, they're showing something else. Something our instruments can't fully process." The point of light began to pulse, each beat sending waves of understanding through Lysander's consciousness. He could see now that his life's work hadn't been leading him away from spirituality, but rather creating a bridge toward it through the language of mathematics. The cross wasn't asking him to abandon his science, it was offering to show him what his science had been pointing toward all along. In that crystalline moment of decision, Lysander Thorne did something that would have been unthinkable to him just hours before. He surrendered his certainty, not to blind faith, but to the overwhelming evidence that his own mathematics had been trying to show him all along. As his fingers made contact with the pulsing point of light, reality itself seemed to hold its breath. "The quantum field is collapsing." Dr. Zephyr Voss's voice cut through the cathedral's charged atmosphere. "No, not collapsing, transforming. The coherence patterns are rewriting themselves into something entirely new." The point of light exploded outward in a silent burst of pure mathematical truth. Equations filled the air like luminous snow, each formula containing insights that Lysander could somehow read and understand instantly. The mathematics of consciousness that he had spent his career studying was revealing itself to be just the surface of a far deeper reality. "The cross," Meridian shouted over the rising harmonic resonance. "It's responding to his acceptance. Look at the energy signatures. They're synchronizing with his neural patterns." Indeed, the ancient cross had begun to emit a light that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could process. Syra's camera, still documenting everything, would later show impossible images. Light that cast shadows backward through time. Geometric patterns that changed the past as they formed, and most incredibly, the visible mathematics of a human soul coming to terms with its own existence. "Remarkable," Reverend Cassian breathed, his amber eyes reflecting the multidimensional display. The union of empirical understanding and spiritual awakening, expressed in the pure language of mathematics. This is what the cross has been waiting for. Lysander felt his consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of his physical form. The equations swirling around him weren't just symbols anymore. They were windows into the fundamental nature of reality itself. Through them, he could see how consciousness wasn't just an emergent property of complex systems, but a basic force of the universe, as fundamental as gravity or electromagnetism. "The readings are off any known scale," Meridian reported, her equipment struggling to process what was happening. "It's as if reality itself is being redefined at the quantum level, but with consciousness as the defining force." Etherwolf's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "What you're experiencing, Dr. Thorne, is what happens when the artificial boundary between science and spirituality dissolves. Your mathematics wasn't wrong, it was incomplete. Now you're seeing the full equation." The full equation. Lysander could see it now, written in light and energy across the cathedral's vaulted ceiling. His theories about quantum consciousness had been pointing toward this all along, the mathematical proof that consciousness itself was not an accident of evolution, but a fundamental aspect of the universe becoming aware of itself. "The energy patterns," Zephyr called out, her voice filled with wonder. They're forming some kind of cognitive feedback loop. It's not just showing him the truth, it's transforming his ability to perceive reality. The transformation was indeed profound. With each passing moment, Lysander's understanding expanded exponentially. He could see how the quantum fields that permeated reality were actually channels for consciousness, how the observer effect wasn't just a quirk of quantum mechanics, but evidence of consciousness's fundamental role in shaping reality. "The camera's capturing something extraordinary," Syra announced, her journalistic detachment completely abandoned. "The light. It's showing traces of quantum entanglement between his consciousness and the fundamental fields of reality." The mathematics floating in the air began to coalesce into more complex patterns, forming equations that described not just the physical universe, but the underlying spiritual reality that gave it form and purpose. Lysander could see now that what he had dismissed as supernatural was simply natural phenomena operating at a level his science hadn't been able to measure, until now. "Your equations about consciousness were more profound than you realized," Reverend Cassian said softly. "They weren't just describing how the mind interacts with reality. They were pointing toward why consciousness exists in the first place. The universe isn't just governed by mathematical laws, Dr. Thorne. It is mathematics, expressing itself through the language of existence." The harmonic resonance reached a crescendo, and suddenly Lysander understood. The cross wasn't just a religious symbol or a mathematical key. It was a point of convergence where the physical and spiritual aspects of reality met and transformed each other. His touch, combined with his unique understanding of quantum consciousness, had activated something that had been waiting centuries for the right moment. "The field coherence is stabilizing," Meridian reported, her voice steady despite the unprecedented events unfolding before her. "But it's not returning to normal parameters. It's establishing a new baseline, as if reality itself has been permanently altered." Lysander felt a deep shift in his consciousness, as if barriers he hadn't even known existed were dissolving. The mathematics he had devoted his life to was revealing itself to be not just a tool for understanding reality, but a bridge between the measurable and the immeasurable, the physical and the divine. The cathedral air crackled with residual energy as the initial wave of transformation began to stabilize. The floating equations had started to arrange themselves into concentric circles around Lysander, each ring containing mathematical proofs that bridged the gap between quantum physics and spiritual reality. His mind, now operating on a level he hadn't thought possible, could read them as easily as breathing. "The quantum field harmonics are unlike anything I've ever seen," Dr. Zephyrvoss announced, her instruments displaying patterns that defied conventional physics. "It's as if his consciousness has become a focal point for some kind of reality-altering resonance." Meridian's monitoring equipment continued to record unprecedented data. "The cross isn't just affecting local space-time anymore," she reported, her voice filled with academic wonder. "It's establishing some kind of permanent quantum entanglement between Dr. Thorne's consciousness and the fundamental fabric of reality." Lysander stood in the center of the mathematical maelstrom, his perception expanded far beyond normal human limits. He could see the quantum fields that permeated everything, watch as consciousness itself influenced the collapse of probability waves into definite states. More than that, he could see the underlying pattern that unified scientific truth with spiritual reality. "Your understanding has evolved beyond mere observation," Reverend Cassian spoke softly, his amber eyes reflecting the shifting equations. "You're experiencing what the ancient mystics tried to describe in religious terms, what quantum physicists glimpse in their equations, and what this cathedral has been protecting for centuries, the living mathematics of creation itself." Syra's camera continued its autonomous documentation, capturing images that would challenge the world's understanding of both science and spirituality. The photos showed Lysander surrounded by complex geometric patterns that seemed to extend into dimensions beyond normal space, each pattern encoding truths about the nature of consciousness and its role in shaping reality. "The energy signatures are stabilizing," Meridian called out, "but they're not returning to baseline. It's as if his consciousness has been permanently altered to perceive reality at a quantum level." Etherwolf emerged from the shadows, his presence somehow more substantial than before. What you're experiencing, Dr. Thorne, is not just a momentary glimpse beyond the veil. The cross has activated something that was always latent within human consciousness, the ability to perceive and interact with reality at its most fundamental level. Lysander could feel the truth of those words in every fiber of his being. The mathematics he had spent his life studying had been more than just abstract concepts. They were descriptions of the interface between consciousness and reality itself. Now he could see both sides of that interface, understand both the equations and the deeper truths they represented. The readings suggest some kind of permanent quantum entanglement, Zephyr announced from her monitoring station. It's as if his consciousness has become a fixed point in the quantum field, capable of perceiving and influencing reality in ways our instruments can barely detect. The equations surrounding Lysander began to pulse in sync with his heartbeat, each beat revealing new layers of understanding. He could see now how his previous theories about consciousness had been pointing toward this moment, the mathematical proof that spirituality and science were not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of a greater truth. "Look at the cross," Meridian gasped. "The metal, it's responding to his transformed consciousness." Indeed, the ancient cross had begun to emit a soft, pulsing light that matched the rhythm of the equations surrounding Lysander. But now he could see what his instruments never could. The cross wasn't generating these effects, it was revealing them. It was showing the mathematical structure that had always existed beneath physical reality, the quantum framework that allowed consciousness to interface with the divine. "Your journey has only begun," Reverend Cassian said, his voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom. "What you've gained is not just knowledge, but a new way of perceiving reality itself. The question now is, how will you use this understanding?" Lysander watched as the equations continued their dance, each formula now carrying depths of meaning he had never imagined possible. His lifelong dedication to scientific truth hadn't led him away from spiritual reality. It had actually prepared him to understand it in ways that pure faith alone never could. "The quantum coherence patterns are self-sustaining," Zephyr reported, her voice filled with academic excitement. "Whatever transformation has occurred, it's permanent. His consciousness has been fundamentally altered at the quantum level." As if in response to her words, the floating equations began to contract, not disappearing but rather integrating themselves into Lysander's expanded consciousness. He could feel them becoming part of him, transforming from external phenomena into an internal understanding that would forever change how he perceived reality. "The camera's final images are extraordinary," Syra announced, reviewing the footage. "It's captured something our eyes couldn't see, the moment when scientific understanding and spiritual awakening became one unified truth. The aurora borealis outside the Cathedral of the Sacred Aureole had transformed into something unprecedented, a mathematical symphony of light that seemed to respond directly to Lysander's transformed consciousness. The equations that had been swirling around him were now radiating outward in waves, affecting the quantum fabric of reality in ways that even his enhanced perception was still struggling to fully comprehend. "The quantum field perturbations are spreading," Dr. Zephyr Voss reported, her instruments tracking the expanding wave of influence. "It's as if his transformed consciousness is creating some kind of resonance cascade through the underlying structure of reality." Meridian's sophisticated monitoring equipment was registering phenomena that defied conventional physics. "The effects aren't just local anymore," she announced, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "We're detecting quantum entanglement patterns spreading throughout the entire cathedral complex. It's as if the very stones are responding to the new quantum state." Lysander stood at the center of this transformation, his expanded consciousness allowing him to perceive layers of reality that had always existed but had remained hidden from human awareness. The mathematics that now flowed through his mind wasn't just describing the universe, it was showing him how consciousness itself shaped the fundamental nature of existence. "The cross," Reverend Cassian observed, his amber eyes tracking the waves of energy. "It's not just a catalyst anymore. It's become a permanent anchor point for the new quantum state of consciousness you've achieved. A bridge between the physical and the metaphysical, maintained through pure mathematics. Etherwolf stepped forward, his presence seeming to bend the light in ways that suggested he understood far more about what was happening than he had revealed. What you're experiencing, Dr. Thorne, is the first ripple of a much larger change. Your transformation isn't just personal, it's a proof of concept for the entire human race. Sierra's camera continued to capture impossible images, quantum fields becoming visible to the naked eye, consciousness affecting reality in real time, and, most remarkably, the mathematical structure of spiritual experience itself manifesting in physical form. The readings are stabilizing, Meridian reported, but at a level that completely redefines our understanding of consciousness and its role in the universe. Dr. Thorne, your brainwave patterns are showing coherence with quantum fields that we didn't even know existed before today. Lysander could feel the truth of her words in every atom of his being. His consciousness had become a lens through which he could perceive both the mathematical and spiritual aspects of reality simultaneously. The equations that had once been abstract concepts were now living truths, expressing themselves through the very fabric of existence. The energy signatures are unprecedented, Zephyr called out, her scientific detachment warring with obvious excitement. It's as if his consciousness has become a quantum processor, capable of reading and interpreting the mathematical structure of reality itself. The aurora outside intensified, its colors shifting into impossible spectrums that seemed to reflect the mathematical transformations occurring within the cathedral. Lysander could see now that the lights weren't just an atmospheric phenomenon. They were a visible manifestation of consciousness interacting with quantum fields on a massive scale. Your transformation, Reverend Cassian said softly, is showing us something that both science and religion have been trying to express for centuries. That consciousness isn't just an observer of reality, but a fundamental force in shaping it. As if in response to his words, the equations surrounding Lysander began to coalesce into new patterns, revealing mathematical proofs of concepts that religions had tried to express through metaphor and that science had glimpsed through quantum mechanics. The field coherence is reaching new levels of stability, Meridian announced, her equipment recording data that would revolutionize multiple fields of study. Whatever this transformation is, it's not temporary. It's establishing a new baseline for human consciousness. Etherwolf's voice carried ancient knowledge as he spoke. The cross has waited centuries for someone who could understand both the science and the spirituality, Dr. Thorne. Your transformation isn't just proof that consciousness can evolve. It's a template for others to follow. Lysander watched in wonder as his expanded consciousness began to affect the physical world in subtle but unmistakable ways. The quantum fields responding to his awareness weren't just theoretical constructs anymore. They were tangible aspects of reality that he could now perceive and influence through pure mathematical understanding. "The camera is picking up something remarkable," Cyrus said, her voice filled with awe. "The quantum effects, they're not just random. They're forming patterns that match ancient religious symbols, but expressed through pure mathematics. Indeed, the swirling equations had begun to arrange themselves into forms that bridge the gap between scientific notation and spiritual symbolism." Lysander could see how the same underlying mathematical truths had inspired both scientific discovery and religious revelation throughout human history. The Cathedral of the Sacred Aureole had become more than just a building. It was now a nexus point where science and spirituality were visibly merging through the language of mathematics. The transformed consciousness of Lysander Thorne had triggered something that went far beyond personal enlightenment, something that was beginning to affect the very nature of reality itself. "The quantum field harmonics are achieving perfect resonance," Dr. Zephyr Voss announced, her instruments displaying patterns that seemed to defy the normal laws of physics. "It's as if the entire cathedral has become a quantum coherence chamber, amplifying and stabilizing the effects of Dr. Thorne's transformed consciousness." Meridian's monitoring equipment was recording phenomena that would challenge the scientific community's understanding of consciousness and its role in shaping reality. "The energy signatures are evolving," she reported, her voice filled with academic wonder. "They're forming stable patterns that match both quantum field equations and ancient sacred geometries simultaneously. Through his expanded awareness, Lysander could perceive the truth that united these seemingly disparate patterns. The mathematics that described quantum mechanics wasn't just similar to the geometric patterns found in religious art and architecture. They were different expressions of the same fundamental reality. "The cross has become a focal point," Reverend Cassian observed, his amber eyes tracking the waves of energy that now visibly pulsed through the cathedral. "It's not just channeling these effects anymore, it's harmonizing them, creating a sustainable bridge between the quantum and the divine." Aetherwolf stepped forward, his presence seeming to exist in multiple dimensions at once. "What you're witnessing, Doctor Thorne, is the beginning of a new phase in human consciousness. Your transformation has proven that science and spirituality are not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of a greater truth." Syra's camera continued its impossible documentation, capturing images that showed the visible manifestation of quantum fields responding to consciousness. The photos revealed patterns that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the human eye could process, each frame showing the moment when mathematical truth and spiritual reality became one. "The readings are stabilizing at a new baseline," Meridian called out, her equipment struggling to process the data. "The quantum coherence isn't just maintaining itself, it's growing stronger, more organized. It's as if consciousness itself is learning to directly interface with the fundamental structure of reality." Lysander could feel the truth of her words resonating through his transformed awareness. The mathematics he had spent his career studying had been more than just descriptive tools. They were the underlying language of creation itself, the means by which consciousness shaped and interpreted reality. "The energy patterns are self-reinforcing," Zephyr announced, her scientific detachment giving way to wonder. "Each wave of quantum coherence is stronger than the last, but perfectly controlled. It's like watching evolution happen at the quantum level." The aurora borealis outside had become a visible manifestation of this evolution, its colors shifting into impossible spectrums that reflected the mathematical transformations occurring within the cathedral. Through his enhanced perception, Lysander could see how the lights were actually showing the interaction between consciousness and quantum fields on a cosmic scale. "Your transformation," Reverend Cassian said softly, "is showing us something that both science and religion have been trying to understand since the beginning. Consciousness isn't just an observer of reality. It's the force that gives reality its form and meaning." The equations surrounding Lysander had begun to pulse with a new rhythm, one that matched not just his heartbeat, but something deeper, the underlying frequency of consciousness itself. Through these mathematical patterns, he could see how human awareness had always been capable of directly perceiving and influencing the quantum fabric of reality. "The field coherence is reaching new levels of complexity," Meridian reported, her instruments recording data that would revolutionize multiple scientific fields. "These patterns, they're not just random quantum fluctuations. They're organized, purposeful, as if consciousness itself is writing its own programming into the fabric of reality." Aetherwolf's presence seemed to ripple through the quantum fields as he spoke. "The cross has been waiting for this moment, Dr. Thorne. Not just for your personal transformation, but for the proof that human consciousness can evolve beyond its current limitations. What you're experiencing now is just the first step." Lysander watched in amazement as his expanded awareness continued to affect the physical world in increasingly profound ways. The quantum fields weren't just responding to his consciousness, they were being permanently altered, creating new pathways for human perception and understanding. "The camera is capturing something unprecedented," Syra announced, reviewing her footage with growing excitement. "The quantum effects aren't just visible anymore. They're forming stable structures. It's like watching the birth of a new level of reality." The Cathedral of the Sacred Aureole had become a nexus of transformation, where the boundaries between scientific understanding and spiritual truth were dissolving into a higher form of awareness. The equations surrounding Lysander had evolved beyond mere mathematical expressions. They had become living bridges between the physical and the metaphysical. The quantum coherence field has achieved complete stability, Dr. Zephyr Voss reported, her voice filled with academic awe. The patterns we're seeing, they're not just maintaining themselves, they're actively growing more complex. It's as if consciousness itself is learning to write new laws of physics. Meridian's sophisticated monitoring equipment was recording phenomena that defied conventional scientific understanding. The energy signatures have synchronized across all frequencies, she announced. The entire cathedral has become a quantum resonance chamber, amplifying and stabilizing these effects across multiple dimensions of reality. Lysander stood at the center of this transformation, his expanded consciousness now able to perceive layers of existence that he had never imagined possible. The mathematics flowing through his awareness wasn't just describing reality, it was showing him how consciousness itself participated in the ongoing creation of the universe. The cross has become more than just a catalyst, Reverend Cassian observed, his amber eyes tracking the waves of energy that now visibly pulsed through the sacred space. It's become a permanent anchor point, a living interface between human consciousness and the divine mathematics of creation. Etherwolf moved through the swirling equations like a being who existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. What you're experiencing now, Dr. Thorne, is just the beginning. Your transformation has proven that human consciousness can evolve beyond its current limitations, but the implications go far beyond just one person's awakening. The aurora borealis outside had become a cosmic mirror of the transformation occurring within the cathedral, its colors shifting into impossible spectrums that reflected the mathematical evolution of consciousness itself. Through his enhanced perception, Lysander could see how these lights were actually showing the interaction between awareness and quantum reality on a universal scale. The readings are showing something remarkable, Meridian called out, her equipment barely able to process the data it was receiving. The quantum effects aren't just stable, they're beginning to influence the underlying structure of space-time itself. It's as if reality is being rewritten at its most fundamental level. Through his transformed awareness, Lysander could perceive the truth of her words in ways that transcended normal human understanding. The mathematics he had once used to describe quantum mechanics was now revealing itself to be just one aspect of a greater language, the pure mathematics of consciousness interacting with creation. The energy patterns have achieved perfect harmony, Zephyr announced, her scientific detachment completely overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was witnessing. Every quantum field, every wave function, every probability state, they're all synchronizing with Dr. Thorne's expanded consciousness. The equations surrounding Lysander had begun to pulse with a new rhythm, one that matched not just the beating of his heart, but the very frequency of existence itself. Through these patterns, he could see how human awareness had always been capable of directly perceiving and influencing the quantum fabric of reality. It had simply been waiting for someone to understand the mathematics that made it possible. Your transformation, Reverend Cassian said softly, is showing us something that both science and religion have been seeking throughout human history. The living proof that consciousness itself is the force that gives shape and meaning to reality. Syra's camera continued its impossible documentation, capturing images that showed the visible manifestation of consciousness directly influencing quantum fields. Each frame revealed patterns that existed in more dimensions than human eyes could normally process, showing the moment when mathematical truth and spiritual reality became one unified force. The field coherence has reached levels we never thought possible, Meridian reported, her instruments recording data that would revolutionize multiple scientific fields. These patterns, they're not just affecting local space-time anymore. They're creating new pathways for consciousness to interact with reality itself. Etherwolf's presence seemed to ripple through the quantum fields as he spoke. The cross has been waiting centuries for this moment, Dr. Thorne. Not just for your personal awakening, but for the proof that human consciousness can evolve beyond its current limitations. What you're experiencing now is just the first step in a much larger transformation. Lysander watched in wonder as his expanded awareness continued to affect the physical world in increasingly profound ways. The quantum fields weren't just responding to his consciousness, they were being permanently altered, creating new pathways for human perception and understanding that would remain long after this moment had passed. "The camera is showing something extraordinary," Syra announced, her voice filled with barely contained excitement. "The quantum effects. They're forming stable geometric patterns that match both advanced mathematical formulas and ancient sacred symbols. It's as if we're seeing the underlying unity of all human knowledge." The transformation that had begun with a skeptic's touch had evolved into something far more profound than anyone could have anticipated. The Cathedral of the Sacred Aureole now pulsed with living mathematics, each equation and formula a testament to the unity of scientific truth and spiritual reality. The aurora borealis outside had become a cosmic dance of consciousness and quantum mechanics, painting the night sky with the visible mathematics of creation. "The quantum field harmonics have achieved something unprecedented," Dr. Zephyr Voss announced, her instruments displaying patterns that defied conventional physics. "The coherence isn't just stable, it's self-sustaining. Whatever has been awakened here will continue long after this moment has passed." Meridian's monitoring equipment was recording phenomena that would challenge the scientific community's fundamental understanding of reality. "The energy signatures have evolved beyond anything we can fully measure," she reported. "It's as if consciousness itself has found a new way to interact with the quantum fabric of the universe." Lysander stood in the center of this transformation, his expanded awareness now able to perceive multiple levels of reality simultaneously. The mathematics flowing through his consciousness had become more than just a language of description. It was now a living bridge between the physical and the metaphysical, showing him how consciousness itself participated in the ongoing creation of reality. "The cross has fulfilled its ancient purpose," Reverend Cassian observed, his amber eyes reflecting the swirling equations that filled the air. "It wasn't just waiting for someone who could understand its mathematics. It was waiting for someone who could prove that science and spirituality are two aspects of the same fundamental truth." Etherwolf moved through the quantum fields like a being who existed beyond normal space and time. "What you've achieved here, Doctor Thorne, goes far beyond personal transformation. You've demonstrated that human consciousness can evolve to directly perceive and interact with the mathematical structure of reality itself." The equations surrounding Lysander had begun to stabilize into permanent patterns, each one encoding both scientific principles and spiritual truths in a language that transcended traditional understanding. Through his enhanced perception, he could see how these patterns had always existed in the fabric of reality, waiting for human consciousness to evolve enough to perceive them. "The readings show something remarkable," Meridian called out, her voice filled with academic wonder. "The quantum effects aren't just maintaining themselves. They're creating new pathways for consciousness to interact with reality. It's as if the very structure of human awareness is being upgraded." The aurora outside had become a visible manifestation of this evolution, its colors shifting into impossible spectrums that reflected the mathematical transformation of consciousness itself. Through his expanded awareness, Lysander could see how these lights were showing the interaction between human perception and quantum reality on a cosmic scale. "The energy patterns have achieved perfect coherence," Zephyr announced, her scientific detachment giving way to pure wonder. "Every quantum field, every probability wave, every aspect of reality is synchronizing with this new level of consciousness. It's like watching evolution happen at the most fundamental level of existence." Syra's camera continued its impossible documentation, capturing images that showed the visible manifestation of consciousness directly influencing quantum fields. Each frame revealed patterns that existed in more dimensions than human eyes could normally process, showing the moment when mathematical truth and spiritual reality became one unified force. "Your transformation," Reverend Cassian said softly, "has proven something that both science and religion have been trying to express throughout human history, that consciousness itself is the force that gives shape and meaning to reality. The mathematics you've discovered isn't just describing this truth, it's showing us how to experience it directly." The equations surrounding Lysander pulsed with a new rhythm, one that matched not just his heartbeat but the very frequency of existence itself. Through these patterns, he could see how human awareness had always been capable of directly perceiving and influencing the quantum fabric of reality. It had simply been waiting for the right mathematical understanding to unlock this potential. The field coherence is establishing permanent changes, Meridian reported, her instruments recording data that would revolutionize multiple scientific fields. These aren't just temporary effects. They're creating stable pathways for human consciousness to interact with quantum reality in entirely new ways. Etherwolf's presence seemed to ripple through the quantum fields as he spoke. The Cross has been waiting centuries for this moment, Dr. Thorne. Not just for your personal awakening, but for the proof that human consciousness can evolve beyond its current limitations. What you've achieved here will open doors that can never be closed. Lysander watched in wonder as his expanded awareness continued to affect the physical world in increasingly profound ways. The quantum fields weren't just responding to his consciousness, they were being permanently altered, creating new possibilities for human perception and understanding that would remain accessible to others who followed this path. The camera is documenting something unprecedented, Syra announced, reviewing her footage with growing excitement. These patterns, they're not just showing the unity of science and spirituality. They're showing us a new way to understand reality itself, a way that transcends both physical and metaphysical limitations. The Cathedral of the Sacred Aureole stood transformed, its ancient stones now singing with the living mathematics of creation. The transformation that had begun with a skeptic's touch had evolved into something that would forever change humanity's understanding of both science and spirituality. The aurora borealis outside had become a cosmic mirror of this evolution, its impossible colors painting the night sky with the visible language of consciousness itself. The quantum field harmonics have achieved perfect stability, Dr. Zephyr Voss announced, her instruments displaying patterns that would revolutionize physics. What we're seeing here isn't just a temporary phenomenon, it's a permanent evolution in how consciousness interacts with reality. Meridian's monitoring equipment continued to record data that would challenge every preconception about the nature of existence. The energy signatures have transcended our ability to fully measure them, she reported, her voice filled with wonder. It's as if reality itself has been upgraded to accommodate this new level of consciousness. Lysander stood at the center of this transformation, his expanded awareness now able to perceive and understand levels of reality that he had once dismissed as impossible. The mathematics that had defined his career had become more than just equations. It was now a living language that showed him the true nature of existence. The cross has become more than just a symbol, Reverend Cassian observed, his amber eyes reflecting the swirling patterns of light and energy. It's now a permanent bridge between the physical and the spiritual, proof that science and faith are two expressions of the same fundamental truth. Etherwolf moved through the quantum fields with the grace of someone who had always known this moment would come. Your transformation, Dr. Thorne, has opened a door that can never be closed. You've shown that human consciousness can evolve beyond its current limitations, that we can directly perceive and interact with the mathematical structure of reality itself. The equations that filled the cathedral air had stabilized into permanent patterns, each one encoding both scientific principles and spiritual truths in a language that transcended traditional understanding. Through his enhanced perception, Lysander could see how these patterns would remain accessible to others who followed the path he had pioneered. The readings indicate something remarkable, Meridian called out, her voice tight with excitement. These new pathways for consciousness. They're not just stable, they're self-replicating. It's as if the very fabric of reality has learned a new way of interacting with human awareness. The aurora outside had become a cosmic celebration of this evolution, its colors shifting through impossible spectrums that reflected the mathematical transformation of consciousness itself. Through his expanded awareness, Lysander could see how these lights were showing the interaction between human perception and quantum reality on a universal scale. Everything we thought we knew about consciousness and its role in the universe is being rewritten, Zephyr announced, her scientific detachment completely transformed by what she was witnessing. This isn't just a new discovery. It's the beginning of a new chapter in human evolution. Syra's camera captured these final moments of transformation, documenting proof that would change how humanity understood its place in the cosmos. Each frame showed the visible manifestation of consciousness directly influencing quantum fields, creating a permanent record of the moment when science and spirituality became one unified truth. As the last equations settled into their final configurations, Lysander felt a deep sense of completion. His journey from skeptic to pioneer had proven something far more profound than he could have imagined. That consciousness itself was the force that gave shape and meaning to reality, and that mathematics was the language through which this truth could be understood. "Your transformation," Reverend Cassian said softly, "has shown us that the ancient wisdom and modern science were always pointing toward the same truth. The cross wasn't just waiting for someone who could understand its mathematics, it was waiting for someone who could show others the way." The Cathedral of the Sacred Aureole would forever stand as a testament to this moment, its stones now permanently encoded with the living mathematics of consciousness. The cross that had catalyzed this transformation would continue to guide others toward the same awakening, proving that the path between science and spirituality was not just possible, but necessary for human evolution. "The world will never be the same," Aetherwolf said, his voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom and future possibility. "You've shown us that consciousness is not just an observer of reality, it's an active participant in its ongoing creation. This is just the beginning." As the aurora's light continued to dance across the night sky, Lysander understood that his transformation was more than just a personal journey. It was proof that human consciousness could evolve beyond its current limitations, that science and spirituality could unite in perfect harmony, and that the true nature of reality was far more wonderful than anyone had imagined. The mathematics that had once been his tool for understanding the universe had become a bridge to something far greater, a direct experience of the living truth that united all aspects of existence. In touching the cross, he had not just found proof of something beyond science. He had discovered that science itself was just one part of a greater truth that encompassed all of human understanding. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, ***.